Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from whichever endpoint in the world you're joining us from. My name is Ali Hirji, and I lead both AI and cybersecurity practices at Durham College, and I'm joining you from the beautiful city of Oshawa in the regional municipality of Durham. I acknowledge the indigenous ancestry of this land, and more importantly, remind all of our viewers that even the online space, the digital space, constitutes indigenous land. After all, our wireless cables, rather, our wireless networks, our cables, our fiber footprint do run across this land and sky. You know, when you're putting together the final power hour or the final session to a year, it's quite difficult to understand how do you put some benchmarks? Where do you start from? Last year, at the same time, when I interviewed for the show, I interviewed Sarah Qureshi, Mark Dillon, and John Pinard. And at that time, we chose to focus on certain events and incidents that happened in 2020. A lot of it focused, of course, on the pandemic. And we then created a little bit of a roadmap into what 2021 would look like. Now, I found that show very useful because not only did it allow me to look back, allowed me to look back to see how far we had come from a cyber perspective and how far more we had yet to go. Today, however, as I was putting together the plan for the show, rather 2 weeks ago, reminding you that I am prepared for this show, when I was putting together the plan for the show, I thought to myself, should we look at events? Should we look at incidents? Or should we look at a person? And I decided today to focus and try to understand what's happened in 2021 by looking at the journey of one particular person. If ever there's an embodiment of, if you want to go fast, go alone, you want to go far, let's go together, my guest today is one such individual who embodies the importance of going together and going far. To know a little bit more about my guest today, I'll quote you something directly from a very reliable source, also known as WhatsApp. On his WhatsApp status, he says, "If you teach me, I'll remember. If you show me, I'll probably forget." And I'm rewording it. If you show me, I'll probably forget. If you involve me, I'll understand. And if you step aside, I'll act. Here's an individual who has shown, taught, involved, and now stepped aside for a lot of new folks to take leading roles in the world of cybersecurity. He shares a first name with me, far more intelligent, definitely more handsome, and always well-dressed. Everybody, please join me in welcoming Ali Khan to the Power Hour. Ali, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ali, and everyone. Thanks. Quite the words there. No, thanks for having me here, and glad to be here to speak to you today.
Pleasure is all ours to have you, and it is indeed a great opportunity for me to wrap up 2021 doing a discussion with you. Now, Ali, before I dive into a little bit of what you've achieved in the year in the world of cybersecurity, the world has been in a lockdown. You know, there have been different travel restrictions, but you've consistently done the blasphemous thing of travel. So I ask, where are you today at this moment?
Yeah, no, great. So I'm joining you at the Power Hour here from the Middle East. I'm here in Dubai today. It's about 7 p.m. in the evening, so almost closing the day here. But yeah, no, great to be here. It's great to see a number of people joined in as well from all around the world. Glad to speak to you guys and have a great conversation overall.
Pleasure is all ours once again. Now, for our audience members, I'm going to tell you one of the reasons, rather the primary reason I'm interviewing Ali today is because of his book. And the book reads Because You Can, and the team at CyberX will be posting links on their social media so that you can interact with this book and you can get it for yourself as well. But I'm going to unpack for the first 20 minutes, I'm going to unpack what motivated Ali into writing this book called Because You Can, Your Cybersecurity Career. Now, Ali, a very fundamental aspect of this book is that it wasn't just authored by you. You had two other individuals that collaborated on this with you. From an author's perspective, specifically an author in cyber, why was it important for you to bring these diverse perspectives to the table? And what did this journey of writing this book tell you about the diverse perspectives around cybersecurity? Ali?
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, no. So I think speaking about the journey around getting this book out to the world, pretty much, to give us an overview. Basically, I've been teaching cybersecurity at York University for over 6 years now, And in fact, as a graduate from that school, I've always felt that alumni sort of, feeling to it and so forth. So when we started that program, we obviously, had a start just from the scratch. And when we were, we're getting in there. Once we got into the 2-year mark, we kind of had a good perspective around obviously the types of students that that we were kind of working with, the different questions that they had and so forth. And it was quite interesting to me around some of the questions that I kept getting asked. And some of those questions were really around, is this field a right field to get into? What's the right path to kind of build a career in the field? How can I get started? What if I fail? All those types of questions. And it became pretty evident by about 2018, so to speak, about the 2-3 years, that while all of this information, may have existed in bits and pieces on different, Reddit forums or other areas, across the internet or so forth, it wasn't necessarily available in a consolidated manner. Neither was it available in a consolidated and an authoritative manner, right? So, you could find articles around cyber from some great experts out there, even from some from some individuals that that would remain anonymous, or that you wouldn't know. But it wasn't as structured as required. And that's when it occurred to myself and to one of my colleagues, Gaurav Kumar, who's a co-instructor in the university.
Yep.
That why don't we put together and answer all of these questions in a more structured and a more formal manner, and present it out to individuals that are looking to build their careers. And that's when we kind of embarked on that journey. As we started, we also had Arlene Worsley, who was who was one of the students at the school, but she had some great expertise around the thought process, and also around publishing and so on and so forth. And it was a great team that just came together. And when we brought it all out, we structured all through. We started to put pen to paper, started to build it out, and mid this year, back on May 29th, is when we released the book. And have been it's been doing well, and we've been kind of getting some good inputs out there. It's a career guide for students. It's all about individuals that want to know about cyber. Either they're interested to study about the field, or they're interested to just know what the field is all about. They might be a little bit curious about what the field is. We've seen a lot of those kinds of questions come at us as well. And so forth overall. So that's kind of the journey of where the book came into being, and how it came about.
Now, I want to work with that just a little bit, because I'm a firm believer in that the answers that you're looking for often reside in the questions that you ask. Now, one element of this book, and Ali, as proof, I have already marked up your book quite a bit, as you can see. So I have read it, and I did skim over a couple of things, especially the ones where you're talking about all the different certifications, because they were quite intense. So we'll come to that in a bit. But going back to my point earlier on, one of the things that I noticed in this book is it was very relevant and timely. Now, you released the book May 2021, around about that time. And there's an entire chapter dedicated to the impact of COVID and what you have dubbed the elastic workplace. Out of curiosity, as you're trying to put this book together as a guide, you've contextualized it in terms of the quote unquote new normal. How difficult was it to put together the cyber realities facing the elastic workplace? What kind of research did you have to do? And for our audience that's listening, how did you go about getting some of this information? Was it purely based on your experience working in different capacities from your teaching, or did you actually go and speak to a variety of experts across the community? Ali?
Yeah, no, perfect. Yeah, so in order to kind of think broadly, we had to obviously understand the greater audience around the impact that we were kind of looking to make and kind of address overall. It became pretty evident that obviously, when we would start to take a look at certain geographies around the world that are quite developed, the impact of that remote workforce, or the cybersecurity impact of that aspect, would be would be quite streamlined from the way of enabling remote access, or whatever the case may be. However, there's many regions globally that are not as developed as some of the other ones. Those include certain areas where people are still using dial-up, where, believe it or not, there's also certain organizations that are restricted in the amount of remote access that they can provision due to bandwidth considerations, and so on and so forth overall. So we really had to look at the broader perspective, pretty much from a global angle, and try to understand what impacts are we seeing as the pandemic sort of unfolds, and organizations start to adopt a more resilient work structure, including a heavy remote workforce, and so forth overall. So there was a lot of analysis around that. I've had the opportunity, obviously, to work in multiple geographies, including North America, Europe, the Middle East, and so on and so forth. So there was some good inputs that I had from professionals in these regions that was coming in, and we were looking at compiling all that data, consolidating it, and then summarizing it and presenting it in a more structured manner in terms of the impact overall. And that's what the first chapter pretty much kicks it off with, is talking about impacts around cyber when it comes to such events, including pandemics, as pandemics turn into endemics, natural disasters, and so forth.
Very interesting. And I see one or two questions have started coming in. And to the audience members, you can drop your questions in the chat, or you can just directly message them to me, and I'll bring them up as we weave the conversation along. So thank you, and keep them coming. Ali, I want to dissect what you said a little bit more, because you use this term, the elastic workplace, right? And when you look at the domains that you've covered of cybersecurity, so there's a very structured approach. You chose to start with the realities of, as I've always said, cybersecurity doesn't operate in a vacuum, it operates within a context. You contextualize the realities facing cyber professionals with the elastic workplace. Then you progressed into explaining the different domains of cybersecurity. And one of the things that I noticed in the book, and perhaps I'm overreading or underreading into it, is you also tried to bifurcate between hardware-related skills and software-related skills. I've often believed that people who are serious about software are also serious about hardware. You talk about endpoint protection, you talk about a variety of other things. In your perspective, how has the pandemic shaped the skill sets that are required from cyber professionals today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. So, pre-pandemic, there was demand around cyber resources, which was unfilled, globally speaking. There were reports out there from IC Square, 2019 workforce study that was estimating global demand at 3.5 mil, roughly, and some other estimates out there as well. What the pandemic has actually done is it has not just accelerated the need for cybersecurity professionals, but it has increased that demand, particularly because supply for very specific resourcing has increased. With the pandemic, organizations have shifted into massive initiatives around digital transformation. So organizations understood through the pandemic that they need to accelerate certain initiatives around digitalizing services, moving away from face-to-face services in different industries, whether that's manufacturing, whether that's banking, whether that's healthcare, or whatever the case may be. As you move towards more digital technologies, and as you move toward more digitization, you need professionals to be able to protect and to be able to understand those dynamics in those fields. And we have seen some positions that have increased in surged in demand from that space. So some examples would be full stack developers that have DevSecOps experience. DevSecOps, obviously, a growing field, has now just overshot, and there are a lot of jobs unfilled, a lot of requirements around. Absolutely. Some really good cybersecurity engineers that can understand DevSecOps. Some other areas include, for example, testing vulnerabilities and so forth overall. This month, we've seen the global quote unquote pandemic on the Log4j vulnerability out there. professionals that can actually look at vulnerability, can look at those and work on those, that demand has shot up. So overall, we were already experiencing a high demand for cyber professionals before the pandemic, but with the pandemic hit, with organizations moving into resiliency, pushing out initiatives to build more resilient infrastructures, pushing out more digital initiatives, that demand has just increased, and we're continuing to see that trend rise. We're doing, a lot of us are doing some great initiatives, including our academics, where we're building out these programs and so forth. But nonetheless, the demand keeps going up because it is a pretty intense market out there, and the requirements are pretty high.
Yeah, I do want to discuss the supply and demand side just a little. Ali, I may probably come from a slightly different school of thought on this, but I've often been of the opinion, and I say this because it's a slightly subjective opinion, that I don't believe necessarily that there is a shortage of technical skills when it comes to cyber, but I do believe that there is a shortage of cybersecurity professionals or programmers who can communicate well, who can dialogue well within an environment, who can project manage well. And I think it's becoming very apparent, even from the way you've written this book, that the eclectic skills, that eclectic cyber personality that organizations are looking for is really the demand of the hour. And I want to unpack the supply demand side and those skill sets a little bit later on. Because I always like to engage the audience and weave them into the conversation, I see two questions that have come in that relate to culture. And I'll reword them a little bit. What aspect of your book, and I noticed this when you actually gave it to me when we met, believe it or not, in person, August 10th, I believe, when we met in the West, and you gave me this personally signed book. I looked at the title and it stood out to me because it says, "Because You Can, Your Cybersecurity Career, a simple and practical handbook with actionable insights for success." But you didn't contextualize it geographically. You didn't say that this is a recipe for success in North America. This is a recipe for success in the Middle East. It's a global outlook that you've taken. And I think our audience has cued into this, where one individual asks, Ali, in your perspective, is there a difference, or did you notice while doing research for this book, did you notice a difference in cyber culture and practices in the Middle East and, say, North America? Interesting question. Ali, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. So when it comes to practices and cultures, each geography and each organization within those geographies, have developed obviously their own cultures over time. That comes from a number of different perspectives, right? Organizations that are operating within a certain geography are built those cultures based on the way that the market operates, the way that regulations in that market are operating, the different types of legislations that they may be accountable to, and the market that they're serving. So basically, when we take a look at the West in particular from a global perspective, we see some maturity around privacy and how data, for example, is handled for sensitive data for individuals are handled within organizations. As we start to take a look at some of the markets that are in the progressive economies that are developing, privacy is obviously still being built out in those markets, and the way that organizations operate and they collect data is a bit different than the way that organizations would collect and operate data in some of the developed areas. And that's some of the ways in which there are certain differences and some certain subtle kind of differences in the overall market. So when you start to take a look at your career as a cybersecurity professional in these different markets, I do suggest that it's obviously important to understand the culture that you're kind of working in, the regulations, the legislations around certain aspects, whether that includes privacy, data management, security aspects, and so on and so forth overall. But there are certainly differences in the way organizations across different geographies are obviously looking at cyber. Certain initiatives carry a higher priority in certain geographies around cyber versus others. However, there are some common themes. And when we talk about common themes, those are primarily around resiliency, right? And, post-pandemic, as we're sort of moving towards the endemic stages, we are looking at more and more initiatives within organizations, globally speaking, that are more focusing on resiliency. They want to make sure that their business continuity and DR aspects are well sought out. There are multiple processing sites that are being handled out. Individuals and employees can work, remotely anywhere at any time, and so on and so forth overall. So common themes, set aside, there are obviously certain differences from a cultural perspective that we need to be aware of as well.
Yeah, and I think, I've been asked this question as well, since I too grew up in Dubai and spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East. I think one of the things that the pandemic did, rather, I don't think, I know, it also shifted approaches to technology. For example, engagements in the Middle East now, especially Dubai, for example, using Zoom and using Skype suddenly became the norm. And once there was a period of time when, those were slightly costly VoIP services to access. And now the whole UAE market is exposed to a whole new reality of Zoom. The concept of Zoom bombing was new for us here. In the Middle East, it was a completely alien kind of concept because it wasn't as used as much. So I think it's super important. And thank you to the audience member for asking this question. Culture is a design for living, and every geography has a very separate design. I also, if I can, I'll leave for 30 seconds. I'll also add this, that, to the audience member that asked this question, keeping in mind different geographies also face different geopolitical circumstances, different nation state actors, different nation state realities. If you look at in the Middle East, certain friendships that were formed over the last year or so generates a lot of different kinds of interest, and different kinds of attacks are realized through that. Different events happening in the world can realize different types of attacks. So it's really important to stay culturally relevant. And I think that comes out a lot in your book. Now, Ali, there's another question related to culture, which I think I'll ask now, and then I'll go back to the research that you've done along with your colleagues for this book. And this is an interesting one. And again, I'll sort of divvy it up into two questions. The first part of this is pretty straightforward, which is the book is currently in English. Are you potentially looking at taking this into other languages? But number two, which is probably the more in-depth question, is how important is it for cyber professionals to be bilingual? Ali, two pretty heavy questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think the question on bilingualism is key. Obviously English being the universal language, but when you start to take a look at the world as your oyster, so to speak, you'll start to notice obviously that different markets have a heavy concentration of a secondary language. We obviously have French as in Canada, in the US, primarily on the South, and even further that we'll probably see Spanish as a major, second language there. Middle East, obviously Arabic, and obviously Europe is very, very well sort of divided and so forth overall. And then as we move towards East, we have Mandarin and some of the other languages, Hindi and so forth overall. Being bilingualism definitely has its benefits. It will increase your outreach. It will help you with obviously communication and so forth overall. However, it's not a showstopper in any capacity. There are some great professionals out there, let alone cyber, but just professionals in general that just speak English as an example. However, there is something that I've come across in the past, and I think that's something that we could probably keep in mind is, if we can learn three major languages, we are very well able to speak to about 90% of the world. And those languages are primarily English, Mandarin, and Arabic. So I think if we kind of think through that a little bit, it could help us as we start to build out our careers or build out our networks, is how to kind of work around some of those things. The first question, Ali, around the translation. So definitely that is something that we're looking at, but currently we're working on the audio version of the book. So basically looking at the English audio version. Yeah. And then we are looking at translating it into Hindi first, followed by Mandarin, and that's something that's currently in the works.
Well, if you're translating into Hindi, and then the obvious next step is going to be creating a film out of it. And as you know, I live on a diet of Bollywood and biryani, so I would be more than happy to engage with you on that and talk some more, and perhaps launch my ill-fated career in that sector. Anyways, enough of that. Ali, thank you for that. And we've got another about 35 minutes, and I do see one or two more questions that are coming in. An interesting one coming in around immigration as well and your perspective. So, Rotak, thanks you for that question. We'll come to that very shortly. Ali, I want to come back to the book. I read it about 3 months ago. Just skimmed it again last night just to see about some of the points, and I used a lot of it in my class. One of the things that you also do very well, along with your colleagues Arlene and Gaurav, is you look at the historical context around how cyber has evolved. You use this term where security was once dubbed the career of the future. And you also look at the evolutions of ARPANET and the first set of nodes that were created and how TCP protocols came about, etc. How important was it for you to do all of this research and pen it down? Because at the end of the day, Ali, you had to make a decision. It's about 300 plus pages. It's an easy read. It's not a dense read, but it's still 300 odd pages. And a lot of it at the start covers the historical evolution of cybersecurity. Why was that an important decision for you to make and a route to take, as opposed to maybe, and I hate to sound rude when I say this, but I'll say it nonetheless, you could have made it into 100 pages and made it into a simple guide. Why create this novel-like feel to it? Ali?
Great. Yeah, no. So when we set out on the journey around building this up and putting the structure around the book, we had to think about the audience that we were targeting and the audience that would be benefiting from the knowledge that we were going to be putting forward. And obviously, one aspect of that was students that are looking to learn about the field and to get into the field, which is a good percentage of the overall audience. However, we just didn't want to limit it to that. We wanted to make sure that individuals who don't necessarily want to get into cyber, but they're curious about what this field is all about because they keep hearing about it. There's news around this, and they keep seeing what's going on globally. It was important for us to kind of understand what kind of background knowledge they would have as they would read this and what kind of information we would need to provide. Right. We also had to look at different age groups as well. There is a lot of Gen Z that we're now seeing coming to the market. These are individuals born sort of late 1990s onwards, right? They're born with technology, so they haven't lived the days of days like me when I've used dial-ups to connect to the internet and so forth overall. And when we started to kind of look at that entire sort of audience set, it became very evident that we couldn't just jump right into the topic. We couldn't just get in and just talk about cybersecurity as it is in the current era. We had to give the readers a perspective around where this stems from. What is the historical context? Why is events such as when IBM found that big moth into their server room and they called it a bug? Why is that important? And what the evolution looks like? Because I think giving readers a picture from the beginning is quite important. To help them kind of understand how the field sort of stems and where it comes from. So that's where sort of that background comes from, Ali, and that's where we kind of set out and said, okay, we do need to start from the beginning, and we need to give the readers a holistic perspective around this.
To know where you are, you need to realize the journey that you've come through, and I agree 100%. Right? I've always said this: cybersecurity is not a product; didn't just happen. It's a process. It's a journey, not a destination. And I think that decision, albeit making it a little bit of a longer read, is certainly worthwhile because I think one of your goals with this book was to make cybersecurity more accessible to different skill sets. And someone would pick this up just to read about the history of cybersecurity and where things are headed to. Now, I want to unpack another area in this book. So there are numerous chapters, and I don't remember all of them verbatim. But when you go through it, and you talk about the first worm, you talk about various elements of the book. One thing that I clearly remember is you've also not just looked at, so for example, if you look at chapter 6 onwards going into chapter 7, you don't just look at certifications and skills in terms of how you get into cyber. You're not just looking at students who are new to industry, new to work. You've also written this book for executives. And for example, you talk about the CCISO certification. You talk about executive level certifications as well. What's the response been like to the book? Is it predominantly students, young students that are coming to you and saying, hey, I was looking for, how to get into cyber? Or have you also seen executive members, let's say a CFO, come to you and say, I have a lot of experience in reading this book, taught me a thing or two of how I can involve myself in the security posture of my organization. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting you asked this, Ali. So, I mean, definitely, primarily, obviously, we've seen a lot of the student population that has been, accessing the content and so forth. However, there are a lot of senior individuals, interestingly, looking at some of these questions and looking at some of these, looking at some of the content as part of this book, and actually looking at what this talks about. One key example that I could give is actually back in class. In school, we had one of this very senior individual that actually just retired from NASA. So, so she was an astronaut, and she basically, she sits on the board on one of the on one of the financial institutions in Canada, and she's had people from IT coming and knocking on the door on the board, asking for funding. And whenever the board sort of tries to understand what the funding is all about, all they hear back is cybersecurity. So she's curious to understand what cybersecurity is all about, and why is funding required so heavily for this domain. And that's something that obviously is being addressed through the book, and that we're talking about. So there has been cases where there's been executives that actually have come through, and they've kind of seen what we talk about in terms of the content, why cybersecurity touches every single aspect of an organization, whether that's IT, OT, or IoT, whatever the case may be, and it deepens kind of their understanding around the subject matter overall.
Yeah, interesting points, because as you know that I chair the Phelps Cybersecurity Board, or what's also called now HUMINT, for Human Intelligence. And when I recommended this book to the board, I was very clear in saying that this is not a DIY cybersecurity guide. This is not a do-it-yourself cybersecurity guide, but it's more a book that allows you to reflect on three pillars. Number one is, if you are in the space of cybersecurity, how should you be talking about it to those around you? So I think if you're already embedded in security, this gives you a little bit of a contextual lens. Number two, if you are an executive trying to get into cybersecurity and trying to sort of see where you fit in, I think that the way in which you've broken down the domains can make it very relatable and very simple for somebody to understand. And number three, really, it's emphasizing the point that for those of us who are in security, who are in these digital and emerging technologies, it's important to be good storytellers. It's important to be able to capture the narrative of your experiences. And I feel that this book gives you a lot of that. The writing is quite good. The flow is interesting to follow, and it's digestible. It may be 300 pages, but it's very digestible and easy to follow along with. So thank you for making this book truly eclectic. I do want to just dive into this a little bit more in terms of the writing style that you've taken in this book. In a couple of moments, you go through the book where you start to dissect certain certifications. And you've sort of looked at what if you want to do your CISSP, you want to do your CEH, whatever it may be, from a variety of bodies, ISACA, IC Squared, CompTIA, EC Council, you've gone and dissected the value of some of these certifications. How exactly did you do this? Did you just base it on, I know that you have more certifications than you have hair on your head, and you've got a lot of them behind you. But more importantly, did you just base it on your personal experience? Or did you go and scrape the internet to see what people were talking about? Did you read reviews? Did you go and talk to different companies? How did you come to the assessments that you came to about the various certifications?
Yeah, no, great. Certifications definitely play an important role as you're moving into your sort of intermediate to senior level career in cyber. The when we started to take a look at certifications, the basic element that we first looked at was the NIST cybersecurity framework that's been developed out there. And we looked at all the different potential roles that cybersecurity individuals would play in their careers. We divided those into, as you'll see in the book, into three sort of major categories. The first one was around sort of technical roles. The second one around managerial, and the third one really around sort of pseudo functional sort of role types and so on overall. Once we did those mappings into the and we kind of consolidated different roles, then we started to kind of look out, okay, for this specific set of roles, so that could include, for example, project managers in cybersecurity or whatever the case may be, what is it that we're seeing in the industry and what certifications are targeted to that specific role? And then we started to obviously, expand upon those certifications and talk about it from that perspective. The reason why we took that angle to sort of bring that in was again from the perspective of the reader, right? So when the reader is looking at it, the reader is probably evaluating, am I a technical resource? Am I a technical individual? Am I non-technical? Am I more project management focused? Am I more around developing, more around analysis, whatever the case may be? And as they're kind of looking at that, they're more likely to focus on the sections that they see themselves best fit for. And sort of that's when we sort of map it backwards and provide those updates. So that was the approach that we took around that chapter, is to provide the different roles out there, and then obviously then talk about certifications as they would relate to certain roles.
That's an interesting point. And, as you know very well, and, we deal with it a lot at the college as well. I've had meetings with with a variety of bodies that offer cybersecurity trainings. Toronto School of Management is a good example, Durham College itself, Ontario Tech, which is our sister university. And one of the number one questions that you find with students is, yes, for sure, the campus experience gives you a certain cybersecurity perspective that you wouldn't get anywhere else. In our case, you can also get involved in applied research and creating products, which also you have a very good eye into as someone working with us as well. But a number one question we often get is, which certification should I go after? And when students go out into the internet, it literally is like, drinking from a fire hydrant. There's just way too much that's out there. So I think, again, for our audience that's listening, the investment in this book is really about helping you also navigate some decisions that you need to make. It's not just theoretical, it's very practical decisions that you want to make. And one thing that I found quite interesting is that, and I thought perhaps, I can see why you wouldn't include it in the book, but I think the readers from this can create their own scoreboard about which certification suits them the best. You can create that matrix and that index for yourself. And Ali, I think this is super important, because one of the questions I ask quite a few people when I hire them is, if I see a certification or two, I ask them why they took that certification. And if they're able to explain that to me, that tells me about the thought process, the attitude behind continuous learning. So again, a very important element of the book. Now, Ali, I'm going to go to some of the other questions that have started coming in. One relates to immigration. And I think this will be a really good way to pivot into, what you're seeing going into 2022 and how your experience writing the book and your work experience dives into that. This question reads, and I believe this question is from Matthew, where he says, how do you see immigration impacting cybersecurity? And more importantly, immigrants. So I guess this is more a reflection on skilled professionals coming from the Middle East, from India, etc., coming into Canada, for example. Do you think this is going to immediately bolster our cybersecurity postures in Canada? Or do you think that a lot of immigrants coming in need certain supports before they can render value from a cyber perspective? Ali?
Yeah, no, certainly. So my view on skilled professionals that are moving geographies and so forth is that they've already worked in that domain for a certain amount of years. They've probably gone through the certifications. They've probably proved their sort of knowledge and aspect in that regard. However, it does take time to get acquainted into the culture of a certain geography and organization, which I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. Yeah. Is the way that work is conducted and the way that sort of certain activities are done in certain parts of the world might be a little bit different than how organizations and environments are doing work in other geographies. In my view, I think it would take roughly around 4 to 6 months for a intermediate to an expert sort of professional to kind of understand the dynamics of the new working environment compared to sort of where they came from. And I think that value would probably start to come in at that point in time. I do think that it's important for new professionals that are moving markets to make sure that they're focused on not just the technical depth of their skill set, but also on the sort of socioeconomic sort of aspects of the working environment that they're moving towards. Certain cultures and geographies are for example, may not have direct sort of, let's say, access control protection mechanisms compared to other geographies, and so on and so forth overall. So I think that sort of mindset shift is a little bit important for individuals moving abroad. However, needless to say, cybersecurity professionals with the certifications that have gone out there now and that are there, these are globally recognized certifications. We're talking about organizations from such as IC Squared, SANS, ISACA, and others, EC Council, and so forth. When individuals present their credentials against with certain certifications, they will be accepted globally. It's not like you will have any challenges there, but it's just that cultural mindset that I would encourage individuals to spend a little bit of time on. Make sure they spend time on networking, trying to understand and building their network in their new environments, and so on.
Yeah, and I'll add to this, quick 2 rupees of thought is even reporting mechanisms and the hierarchy of reporting in the Middle East may be very different to what you face in Canada. Access to the CISO, for example, or access to your senior executives. In some cases, and in some corporations, especially culturally, it can be quite warranted that you have direct access, open door. In other cultures, less so. And it's not a dig at one culture or the other. It's just a method of operation and a design for living that works well for those areas. I think it's absolutely key, right? Is that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You listen twice as much as you speak. And it's super important for cybersecurity professionals to have that mindset and that skill set. I think culture, especially with incident response, has a huge impact. We've got another 18 minutes or so to go, and a few more questions have come in. A couple of people saying that they've bought the book, very interested in reading it. I want to dive into the trends for 2022. And in the book, and I'll try to sort of distill them from the book, given how timely and contextual the book is. In the book, you reference new technologies, AI, IoT. You talk about blockchain. You sort of hint at the realities of NFT, and of course, very loosely, you've spoken about the virtual selves of people, but you haven't really dived into the metaverse. One of the questions that I've seen come in is around how do you see the evolutions in fintech and how these are going to impact the kind of threats that we see with more people going into digital currencies, into stable coins, etc. Where do you see 2022 going from an attack perspective? Do you think the fintech sector is going to see a new wave of attacks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. So, I mean, I think when we talk about fintech, there is some massive changes around fintech that are happening these days, globally speaking. We're seeing countries that are basically moving from that central bank sort of mechanism into more on the distributed ledger aspect and so forth. There are government organizations now that are recognizing digital currencies as well. There's a number of initiatives around startups that are building out, digital wallets, accepting payments in that currency, and so on and so forth overall. One of the things that we have to always keep in mind is that when you put yourself on the other side of the fence and you start to think like a bad guy, you want the black hats would want to focus on where the most gains they can access. And currently data obviously happens to be the biggest aspect that black hats can go against, but there's nothing as attractive as money or as currency or whatever the case may be. And as we move more digitally into these different sort of environments around different sort of digital initiatives around wallets and currencies and so on and so forth, it is inevitable that we're going to be seeing black hats target that really, really aggressively and very closely. And I think these attacks are just going to continue to increase. We're gonna continue to see trends around individuals being targeted to certain attacks, organizations being fully locked out from their digital assets based on certain attack types, and so on and so forth overall. And this is just going to continue to increase. Again, as we are innovating on the right side, the black hats use the same technology as we do, right? And they might even have access to technologies, that are still being developed, and still we're waiting to get our hands on, and so on and so forth overall. So we do have to keep that in mind. It is a rat and mouse sort of game out there, and we just got to keep thinking like a bad guy as we start to build and innovate in that space.
Yeah, I've said this before. Rather, I heard this at CISO Forum, where bad actors they may be unemployed, but they're not unpaid, and cash is royalty. So in the fintech space, I think with the movement of currencies and the move from fiat to digital currencies, etc., access directly to those currencies and to those values and to these ATMs where you can withdraw from, aka the Carbonite bank attacks in Europe back 5-6 years ago. I think you're definitely going to see an increase over there. But I also feel, Ali, is that in terms of a trend going forward, for our audience, especially since we're talking careers, I think you're going to see a lot of fintech firms or firms that are doing more innovative stuff from a financial perspective, new rewards programs, the return of Canadian Tire money like schemes. You're going to see the requirement for more compliance folks, for more risk assessment folks. And I see that as a big trend coming up. I think even Ali, you yourself have a certified designation in privacy, and I believe that's I saw from ISACA. I see that there's going to be a significant push in an increase in a requirement for privacy experts, risk experts, and compliance experts. Speaking about certifications, I knew this question was going to come. Going away from trends, I'll give you 30 seconds to answer this. Somebody says, I just noticed all of your certifications. How did you fund all of this? Ali, 30 seconds.
Look, I think it's not about it's not about the money as more about the vision and the goal, right? So
yeah.
when you start building out your career, you want to map out where you want to be in the next 3 years from a short-term perspective, where you want to be in the mid to long term, sort of from a 5-year plus perspective. And as you build out that plan, you're going to want to put in the right amount of sort of credentials and experience throughout that overall environment. So these certifications were part of the plan that I had to put together as part of building out my career. And I did have to, once I had that plan, I had to put the right action force behind it to be able to do that. And once you do that, you will find the funds to be able to do it. So that's one of the biggest things.
Yeah, my dad always reminds me, and I think it was also Elon Musk that said this, right? If you keep chasing money, it'll just keep running away. So you have to draw those lines, and you have to also know not the cost of everything, but the value of everything that you're investing into. But what I will also add, Ali, is as you get into your careers and as you start to make decisions of which companies you want to work for, and I say that very, very consciously, you also, as you're getting into the career of cybersecurity, and once you're in there, you decide who you want to work for as well, just as much as you're interviewing the company you're working for. And one of the things that I remind, especially some of our more mature students, is go and look at what the professional development plans are within that organization. It's not just good for you that you've got a certain credential funded by the organization, but it also helps the organization building that trust, building that collaborative spirit, and more than anything, building you as a part of their culture. So always ask those questions when you're coming towards your interviews, when you're coming towards signing on that offer, because companies do invest, and there are programs out there, especially in Ontario, Ali, like the Ontario Jobs Grant Program, which allow you to subsidize some of those trainings as well. So the province is playing a very good part in this. And I think for our audience members, I will definitely share this with Julia Lee, who leads the cybersecurity initiatives over at the province, perhaps to do a session with her on her show on Cyber Exchange on these training programs and the grants that are available. So Ali, going back to trends in 2022, I have two more that I wanted to unpack. And my memory, especially at this time of the year, is the size of a squirrel, very tiny at this point. So I don't quite remember if you speak about this in your book, but from a healthcare perspective, we've always known that healthcare data, healthcare infrastructure are prime targets for bad actors. But we've seen the evolution of digital health, telemedicine, so on and so forth. What are your predictions in terms of what are the types of attacks that may come to the healthcare sector that we may previously have not seen? Anything in the Cyber Ali's crystal ball that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, so when you talk about healthcare, we're noticing, with the rapid testing approaches to COVID and so on and so forth, that healthcare organizations and clinics are collecting massive amounts of data around citizens and patients, generally speaking. At this point in time, the amount of data that healthcare organizations had about individuals prior to pandemic and post pandemic is quite substantial. Nowadays, they can look into their database, they can get information about your personal self, your identities, the types of illnesses that you've been exposed to, the types of insurance that you might carry, so healthcare insurance. Although there's not a major healthcare insurance fraud in Canada because we're lucky to have our healthcare system, but south of the border, there's a lot of healthcare insurance frauds out there, and so on and so forth. Overall, healthcare has actually become an interesting target for attackers, because if they can get certain information about individuals, they can start to then take a look at attacks around identity theft, right?
Yeah.
They can capture credentials about individuals, their socioeconomic details. Even if they can collect details about what hospitals they visit the most, they can most likely triangulate where that individual is located, and try to understand, where if physical attacks would then be, would they want to do to be able to provide or sabotage information, or so on and so forth. So healthcare and the data that healthcare organizations have started to collect is become quite immense. We do need to protect those. We need to make sure that those organizations are providing the right amounts of protection around the data that's being collected, and safeguarding this for all citizens and for all individuals that are leveraging the healthcare.
And you know what, I'll add a little caveat to this, is that given, for example, the vaccination passports, which have raised quite a few questions, academic questions, rich theoretical questions, it's not just healthcare institutions now that are capturing healthcare data. It's restaurants as well. It's shopping malls, etc., to a variety of contact tracing apps, so that that's the spread of the attack, or the surface, as we would call it, has increased dramatically, and increased in square footage in 4 or 5 times than what it was prior to the pandemic. Very quickly, and I'll give you 2 minutes to answer this. In terms of a third trend going into 2022, there's a question here about what do you see as what's going to perhaps come down the pipeline when it comes to the autonomous sector that we have. We're looking at autonomous vehicles. We're looking at a lot of IoT devices, which often tend to be open or have a lot of ports that are open and can be a cesspool and a playground rather for botnets. Where do you see certain trends going from a security perspective around autonomous vehicles or autonomous delivery, as an example? Ali, I'll give you 2 minutes for that.
Yeah. So connected mobility, I think, is the new trend that we're seeing now, and that's around vehicles, devices, and all the smart stuff that we're carrying with us in our pockets and in our homes, and so on and so forth. Overall, the amount of data and the amount of information that these devices can now carry and can provide, it's quite immense, and the information that they could do. And that, coupled with actually a major shift in the market that we're seeing, is basically the leap to cloud, or organizations moving their infrastructures to cloud computing environments. That, coupled with the adoption of autonomous vehicles and connected mobility and so forth. Overall, it presents a treasure set for attackers to start to take a look into, and to target, to be able to capture data for multiple types of attacks, including sabotaging nations, conducting vast surveillance of individuals and activities, looking at personal information and trying to do identity theft sort of attacks, and so forth. Overall, this is just going to continue to get bigger and bigger, because we do seem to start to adopt some of these these major enhancements and so on overall, and continue to seeing enhancements in this space. So protection of IoT and the convergence of IT and OT that organizations are stepping through, it's presenting quite some challenges for that organizations to be able to protect those data sets in those different domains.
Yeah, and I think automation, especially as it becomes an act of convenience and remotely controlling, let's say, for example, have dealt with certain situations where folks have come to me about remotely controlling sensors in let's say, the elderly parents' home, the heater, the furnace for that matter, the lighting. In many cases, even I've seen in some cases where you're controlling even the heat on a mug, for example, and making sure that their tea is hot, etc. All of these are devices that are follow that TCP/IP protocol, which is communicating over the internet. And the more you put in that ecosystem, the more the types of devices that are out there that can be sabotaged and used in different attack vectors. Ali, I was mentioning to you in the green room prior to this session that I my last power hour was with Cloudflare, and one of the stats that they brought up, which really shocked me, which was about 50% of internet traffic constitutes bots and botnets. And that is a very, I mean, I knew about it, but it was a very startling statistic, especially coming from an organization like Cloudflare that has a footprint across much of the global internet. I know we could talk more and more about these trends, Ali, and dive deeper into what you see coming into 2022. I will say this, you have a bit of a fan club, and there's one individual, I'll name the individual, Riaz Walji, who says, Ali, great to see and hear from you. Hope you're well and speak soon. Riaz is joining us from London in the United Kingdom. Riaz, thank you for joining. I hope you're keeping safe. We know that the cases of COVID in the UK have gone up dramatically, and I hope you're staying safe and healthy. Ali, a final question for you, rather two very quick questions. You've written a book. You probably will be acting and starring in a movie very soon about the book. What is one book that inspired you or inspires you to date besides your own? Ali?
Yeah, no, perfect. So last year I had the opportunity to read Simon Sinek's Start With Why. And that really inspired me from the aspect of critical thinking and, sort of where, I was sort of headed in terms of my career and my direction overall. And, some of the things that Simon talks about, especially around how the neocortex sort of operates and how we sort of think from the inside out, where we feel more attached towards feelings than sort of factual information about certain things and certain individuals, has been quite inspiring. It has helped me figure out my why. I do think it's a great book. I certainly suggest everybody to get a chance to kind of read it, to see what's looked at it. But that's kind of be one of my big ones that I would certainly say has been quite inspiring for me.
Fantastic, Ali. And Ali, if there's one closing word of advice that you want to give to our listeners as we go into 2022, let's say there is somebody that is saying, I want to break into cybersecurity. I want to get into this field. That's my New Year resolution, so to speak. I want to stand out from the crowd. I want to be unique so that I can be heard in a crowd. What's one piece of advice besides buy and read our book that you'd like to give that individual?
Absolutely. I would say no two individuals are the same. So when you start to build your career in cybersecurity, you want to make sure you have enough data points out there, and you have enough information about individuals that have made good careers in cybersecurity. You want to look at all different types of individuals in different subfields in cybersecurity. And then you want to start to build out your own strategy towards that career aspiration. Don't run into certifications right away. You want to make sure that you have the right right contextual and the base information with you to be able to build your career in. Get into the field at the in the earliest roles as you can, and then obviously then work towards your certification and so forth overall. And lastly, I would just want to say is if I can do it, you can do it as well. Because you can.
Absolutely, because you can. And, very important aspect that you mentioned, right? And I say this all the time because I deal with full stack developers, folks who want to get into DevSecOps. Anybody can write code that a computer can understand. The question is, can you write code that a human can understand? Can you make yourself more relatable? Can you make yourself somebody that people would like to work with? I think those days of cybersecurity professionals working in a silo, closed doors, where, hey, everything's kosher and everything's good to go, don't bother us, have long left us. And being personable, being somebody who we can communicate with, are all important features that you want to look into and cash in on as you present yourself for employment or present yourself for new opportunities in the world of cybersecurity. With that, I'm going to thank Ali Khan for joining us today, for taking time out of his schedule. He always doesn't say that he's busy. He likes to say he keeps himself effective. And I think that's a very good statement to put forward. Everybody can be busy. It's a question about being effective. So I hope, Ali, that this last 60 minutes was an effective use of 60 minutes of your time, and that we at the Power Hour got you to think about your book in different perspectives as well. I did see one or two folks saying they're looking forward for a part two of this, and perhaps we could do a part two with Gaurav and Arlene, and that could be an interesting conversation to have and take their perspectives on why you wrote the book in certain ways and what would you do differently, perhaps. So we'll probably look at that for a session two. Ali, I'm going to ask you to stay on while I bid the audience adieu, and then you and I will have a quick minute in the green room before we bid adieu and wish each other happy holidays. But once again, Ali, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your expertise. I know that we had about 60 odd viewers that were listening, and they've all shared that they found this very useful. And I'm guessing they may also go forward and read your book. So thank you, Ali. To our audience, pleasure's all ours. To our audience, this is the final Power Hour of 2022. It is a very unpredictable time out there right now, wherever you're joining us from the world. A humble request to all of you to stay safe. And of most importance right now is everybody's going through something difficult. Be kind. It is a tough time, regardless of where you stand in the spectrum today. Communities around the world are struggling with the realities of the pandemic, but also the realities of a very new economy that we find ourselves in. And if you learned anything from Ali, really, I'll repeat something that I said at CISO Forum, which is life is not about what you've achieved, but what you've overcome. Help people around you overcome some of the difficulties that we find ourselves in today. Final session of 2022. I begin my next set of Power Hours next year, and the team at Cyber Exchange will be busy working on more shows for you. Hack with Helen, Leading Cyber Ladies, sessions with Julia Lee from the province of Ontario, sessions with BlockSec Beyond the Perimeter, and more importantly, in March, Canadian Women in Cybersecurity 2022, which, believe it or not, takes place at an executive airport. So regardless of where things are going to fall from a COVID perspective, the amount of social distancing that will be possible there will make it a very interesting conference where you can learn at an executive airport how to give your cybersecurity career wings and how to let your career take flight. My name is Ali Hirji. Thank you all for joining. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas if you're celebrating. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next year. Bye for now.